You're good to go.
Great. Thank you, Sabrina. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Committee of the Common Council. I'll call this meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. and we'll do a roll call. Mr. Sirenides?
Present.
Mr. Livingston?
Here.
Ms. Young? Are you with us, Darlene? Oh, there you go. Thank you, Darlene. And Mr. Keegan?
Here.
All right. Ms. Shanahan and Mrs. Smith are not with us tonight, and I am John Kaiser, chairman. I'm also president. And let the record reflect Mr. Hewleman has joined us again. Hello, Mr. Hewleman. Okay. First order of business, some administrative work, and that's the approval of the minutes of June 3rd, 2021. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Anyone would like to recommend? No? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. All right. Looks to be unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we thought today would be a good opportunity to do some reviews and bring some staff in to kind of see what's been going on as far as development in the city.
John, you missed public participation.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, public participation. Sabrina, do we have anyone signed up?
Yes, we have one person from ENNA. I'm not sure who it is, if it's Diane or what, but you're able to speak now. Whoever's here, if you'd like to speak, you can unmute yourself. They might be just listening in as well. So,
okay, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. If try to keep your comments under 3 minutes and introduce yourself and your address. So we'll give it a moment.
Yep, they unmuted, but I'm not sure.
Diane, is that you?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't know that that you would call on me just observing. So I'm just observing tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
That is it.
Okay. All right. We'll close public participation and move on. We've already done the minutes. Move on to new business item A1, and that's a review of the draft East Norwalk TOD regulations and design guidelines. And I believe Mr. Kleppen will be making a presentation to us this evening on all the movement in regards to this plan.
Sure. It's not so much a formal presentation, just hopefully you had a chance to go through the materials that I had sent. I know there was a lot of links and a lot of documents attached, so I know there's a lot. So, but what I figured I would do would be just, instead of doing a real overview, just go through, if you recall, when I was last in front of you on this matter, the kind of a big portion of the discussion centered around, at least my understanding was the green amenities and how to incorporate that more as a, not so much as a nicety as opposed to a requirement. So I think we came up with a method to do that, and I'll walk you through that if that's okay.
Of course.
All right, just give me a minute to get, I'll pull up the map of the area just so everybody's familiar with it. Okay. All right. Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can.
Looks like it's pretty zoomed in. That should be a little better.
Just a lot of windows open.
Yeah, I always have a lot of windows. Yeah. Usually at work, I have 3 monitors open, so it's much easier to navigate all my mess.
Keep up the good work.
Just to give you a brief overview of where things stand. This is the East Avenue TOD zone. Up to the north here is 95. Here is the train tracks that run through the train station, and the north-south route through here is East Avenue. The parcels that are in this gray hatch here, these are the parcels proposed to become the new East Norwalk TOD zone. Probably 90%, maybe a little more, are already zoned neighborhood business, and there are a couple other residential parcels along this area that we've wrapped into the zone. but for the most part, it's already zoned neighborhood business, which is a mainly commercial corridor. The parcels in blue are also zoned neighborhood business. They're recommended to be rezoned to C residential. And then the green parcels that run east-west parallel with the railroad tracks are industrial one zone parcels. All right. So what you discussed before and looked at before was the draft zoning that came with the plan. It was an appendix to the plan. They were pretty well developed zoning regulations. The version that I sent you last week to review, I'd say that they're, for the most part, very similar to what you saw. The main details of that draft zoning are intact. And, those were a lot of the, bones of contention and discussion items that were talked about with the public at, the various commission meetings, as well as your public hearing. And there was, but that hasn't really changed. So we didn't change like the main things were the 3.5 stories or the density proposed. The big thing I came back and I think it was in your resolution language that you sent on to the full council was concerning making sure that the green amenities were not, as I mentioned, not so much of a nicety as a requirement to include in the zoning should anybody seek to gain additional density and additional height. So I'll jump down to that. And if you have any questions at any point in time, please interrupt.
Yes, Steve, if I could, it's okay, Mr. Chairman. So you just said something there that I just want to talk about a little bit, because I was looking at this and I see you did incorporate these items in as amenity points. And I thought that we were going to try and make them requirements in the zoning.
So
yeah.
Go ahead, Tom, sorry.
No, I mean, that's my question to you, because it doesn't, to me, you've added them in, yes, and they're all there, and you get points for them. And you have to have a certain number of sustainability points, as I read it. But those are all, and correct me if I'm wrong, optional still, right? It's not a requirement.
Right. So it might make sense to explain it from this vantage point here. So this is the bulk and height table that, it's pretty standard for any zoning district to have, a set of standards in terms of what the height is, what the density is, what all the setbacks are, et cetera. So so for reference, what was included here, as I mentioned, most of the properties in that area are zoned neighborhood business. So that zone right now, the base zoning there is 2.5 stories and 35 feet. And then it has a density of, so for every 1,650 square feet of lot area, you can put in one residential unit. So that's kind of like today, if somebody had a piece of property, that's how they could develop their property pretty much as of right. So it's kind of important to keep that in mind. What the new zone keeps that underlying zoning for the as of right kind of uses. So it would be the same 2.5 stories, 35 feet, and the same density, as you can see over here. However, through the special permit process, they can increase the number of stories by 1 additional story to 3.5, and then get an extra 10 feet of height, and potentially also reduce the density to 1 unit for every 825 square feet of lot area. So that's where the difference comes in. So to answer your question about the screen share is not letting me move my tabs easy. To answer your question about as a requirement versus an amenity, the underlying zoning is the same. So somebody came in today, even if we change the zoning, they could build the 2.5 story, 35 foot property at the density and the regulations and do that through the site plan approval process. If they want to get that additional height and additional density, then they have to go through the special permit process and provide the amenities that are outlined in the zoning. If that,
Okay, so I understand that. Did you guys consider, imposing any of these requirements on the whole district? I mean, or any other area?
No, so we did, I do have a memo I can share from Corporation Counsel. And the statutory enabling legislation for zoning doesn't allow us to require those green amenities. So it allows you to regulate the, the bulk and height and the setbacks and all those kind of things that I just went through. But it doesn't necessarily say you have to provide all these, solar or green roofs or impervious pavement, all those things. You can't require those. So that's kind of important distinction to make.
Yeah, that's really important. Maybe you can share that. But so then the only way we can get people to incorporate those features is to give them something for it, essentially.
Right. So what we tried to do with the draft regulations as they're set up is to say, okay, if we understand that, and I'm sorry if I'm going to back up as I try to explain, if we understand that the East Avenue corridor has been stagnant for a long time and it needs kind of a boost to get the redevelopment that was outlined in the plan. So our methodology to do that is to incentivize development, to sweeten the pot for them. So, okay, we'll give you that extra density, we'll give you that height, but in exchange for giving you that, we require that you provide the city with these amenities that are outlined in the regulations.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Feedback on Tom's statement. If the zoning commission were to, can they take into consideration the lack of green initiatives or some of these bonuses when approving a application? Or
Sure.
Yes?
Yeah, so I'll back up to the amenities if you have specific questions, but I think the zoning text itself addresses that issue on this point right here under A. So if you see here, it's broken down into two different kind of requests. You can go from 2.5 stories to 3.5 and then get additional density, but by providing 15 amenity points. Or if you provide 20 amenity points, you can get even additional density beyond that. The key clause in both those requirements is, if you can see in the red text, and this addresses specifically your question here, is that it says provided that at least 10 of those amenity points are how we classified them as sustainable amenities. So 2/3 of the amenity points have to be sustainable. And that's kind of the math in both of those, if that makes sense. And I can back up and go through those sustainable amenities if you'd like. So we kind of broke the amenities into different categories. And the first group is kind of like infrastructure related. And those have to do with like kind of public seating, public Wi-Fi, public shaded areas, including that. And then within that, you can get points for certain things, like with some neat examples that came up with were like, powered seating, so you can charge your phone, public Wi-Fi. You can get a point if you put a public water filling station in there. If you provide public art as part of that, you can get additional points. And then the more sustainable amenities to address your concerns. So if somebody builds like a LEED equivalent building, they can get certain points for that. There's some other things like green walls, rain gardens, also added in there community gardens. And so there's a lot of rain gardens that are also kind of like public art. Pollinator habitat was added in there. And I think that's one that actually, I think will be probably one we would see more frequently because it seems like one of the easier ones to achieve. And I think that could actually be a good thing because it's also, if done well, it's a nice landscape feature as well. We also have obviously solar. And what you see in the yellow on these three amenities that are here is that we were still kind of tinkering with the appropriate formula. So for rooftop solar, for example, we initially had it at like 50% of the roof area, but Brian in my office said, well, solar technology is changing and getting more, more efficient all the time. So why not base that on like the kilowatts produced or the percent of the building that's powered by that solar? So we're still kind of researching that and haven't made our final recommendation yet, but we should have that in a couple of weeks. Same thing with geothermal. And then pervious pavers was another one that we added recently. So those are the crux of the sustainable amenities as well. And I think, the point system is another thing that's not 100% ironed out yet. I think it's pretty close. Jonathan Hopkins, who's on Brian Bedoli's staff, has been gracious enough to help us take a look at these because he has a architecture background. And then I think what we'd like to do, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, is we'll probably in September hold a joint public hearing with the Planning Commission and the Zoning Commission to get the public's take. And also I want to know from a development standpoint, make sure this is feasible. We think for the most part it will work, especially on sites larger than 1/4 of an acre. And when you think about that, it's like even though a lot of the parcels in the East Norwalk TOD area are smaller, I think the idea to realize development is there has to be some kind of consolidation on these smaller lots. So this is a way to encourage that and get some more appropriate developments. And the last couple of amenities, and then I'll be quiet, is it talks about some things like with parking, because that was a big thing that came up in the study area. So we talk about shared parking, and if you provide public parking, if anybody's been to Ironworks there in the plaza, on the backside, there are some public parking spaces that the developer did provide, and those are signed, so they are available for the public as opposed to private parking for the residents of the property solely. So.
Hey, Steve, 2 questions. One, I'm looking at your rent reduction. I mean, there's an obligation anyway to give affordable housing, right? 10%, right, for certain size
Correct.
units.
Yeah.
Can you sort of double count here? I mean, do you get points for that, providing what's required by the regs now?
No, so the rent reduction is really targeted for, and if it's not clear, I'll go back and double check that, but it was targeted for commercial tenants. And the committee that looked at the plan as it was getting developed, that was one of their recommendations, because there was a concern about ground floor vacancy. I think that, if you think about the East Avenue corridor, for the most part, it's mostly commercial tenants on the ground floor. There are vacancies. What we've tried to do is limit the requirement for the amount of square footage on the ground floor. So we have that kind of storefront feel without requiring the entire ground floor to be commercial. But the rent reduction is aimed at commercial tenants, not residential occupants upstairs.
Yeah, you may want to make that clear.
Sure.
And the last question I had for now, you got rid of the water amenities, I think like fountains. Can you talk about that?
Sure. And the real rationale is because a lot of times fountains aren't used a good portion of the year. So they go idle, or, sometimes there's issues with fountains and the maintenance and the upkeep. And, one thing we didn't want to see a proliferation of everybody putting in a fountain, because that would get kind of old kind of quick. So we thought that, maybe there were better uses of the area than fountains.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
And I'm happy to put up, if you want me to pull up any of the documents. We did just a quick overview. We didn't get into the design guidelines real specifically with you guys. I know we looked at them. By and large, we didn't change. I think I mentioned in my memo, the consultant TPUDC who's overseeing the zoning regulations rewrite, they did a secondary peer review of this document, as I told you we would do, and we were at the approval stage. And the recommendations that they had, by and large, we incorporated. And they had a lot of changes to just basic things in the design guidelines. There were a couple things that, while the picture of the various architecture items we were trying to highlight were appropriate, they said, however, this contradicts with the regulation requiring parking, not having parking in the front yard. So they said, find a better picture. So we did those things and we swapped them out and tried to make the document a little more cohesive from start to finish.
Anyone else? All right, well, I know, Steve, this has been a long road traveled. I know we still got some work to do, but I'm happy to see that, we have a plan now and we had none in the past, and any new development that comes to the area needs to conform to what the the city's vision is for the area. And I think we put a good final product together. Okay.
If anybody thinks of anything after this, feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to get back to you.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, will you be addressing the new development in the area, or is that going to be Brian, the item 2 on the agenda?
I think it's me, and then I think others might chime in too. So,
Okay, real quick, how goes the industrial zone study? How's that moving along?
pretty good. So the consultant gave us a draft a few weeks back. There were a few things that they proposed that I just didn't think made sense or were going to work. So right now I'm working with them on revising it. One thing I asked them to do, if you recall, in the East Norwalk plan, the consultant did some fit tests on some sites to say, what things can work and what can't work. In the draft report for the industrial zones, they had some different building typologies, which they see as a necessity to get the kind of industrial tenants into some of these buildings and some of these areas. But what I asked them to do was go back. I gave them a couple of sites in South Norwalk, and I said, take these sites and then develop them. Not, what can you do on these sites and how realistic is it? Because I don't want to propose something that's not going to come to fruition just because it sounds good and it's worked in Brooklyn or it's worked in other areas. So they're kind of sharpening their pencils and they're doing an analysis based on those sites, on what the existing taxes paid on those properties are. And we've provided them that data. What if they got developed in the manner which they're recommending, what would be the potential tax base? And then looking at employment with salaries now versus employees and salaries in the future. So I think that's the kind of analysis that'll really help inform what we think is feasible and beneficial in the long run before we adopt any changes.
That's great. Yeah, I know these studies need constant direction unless you get a final product that doesn't suit the needs of what the original goal was. Okay, Steve, if you want to kick it off and give us like a overview of new development, things happening in, that are in progress, soon to be in progress, applied for, just so we can kind of get an understanding of what's happening around Norwalk.
Sure. The trouble with Zoom is the screen share button blocks the top of the tab. Okay, let me get out of that one, out of that one. Sorry, you have to just suffer through me for a second here. Okay, so so this is kind of just trying to direct people in different ways to find out what's going on. If you go on to the Planning and Zoning Department, okay, somebody's yelling, sorry about that. The Planning and Zoning Department webpage, you can find out what's happening in terms of projects that have come in and new things going on. And we're revising our page because it's just been kind of a haphazard for a while. So we're hoping to get that out. But if you go on this tab over here, application fees and meeting schedule, there's it pops you over to this tab and there's applications pending. So if you just click on that, all the applications on the left-hand side under that bar are ones that are recently approved or presently in front of the zoning commission. So just for an example, one that was approved just last week by the zoning commission, there was an article in the paper, was 10 Monroe Street. And so what we did was we have the notices published there. On the left side down through here, here's the application, staff memos, all the submittals by the applicant in terms of updated drawings, whether it's lighting and landscaping, civil engineering, the renderings, et cetera, that's all there. So that's the same thing that applies to, so we just looked at the East Norwalk TOD Village. So all those documents that I referenced are all here. We're trying to keep this up to date and current. So there was another project that was approved was iPark up on Main Ave. Like I said, all the documents are there. So if anybody was looking for those, they're here. So they're always kind of at your fingertips. Another way to keep track of things that have been approved recently would be on the development map that I think I sent you the link to this as well. And we're going to try to keep this updated. I don't know if it's quarterly or bi-monthly or something like that, but this kind of is another kind of repository of projects that have been approved. And some of these are a little older and a little further dated, but by and large, the projects are there for the taking. All right, I'll just zoom in. So just a couple projects that are under development. This one is the kind of the project that you see kind of down the road from Bob's Furniture. It's that building that's kind of built on that rock cliff overlooking 95. That's EDG property, 7175 Connecticut Ave. It's a mixed-use building with residential and medical office. And then, like, if you wanted to look at that, you could just click on it and it shows you a rendering of what that will look like when it's done. So those are kind of the, what you can see on that page. But just to give you a broader overview, I know you wanted to know a little bit more. Yep.
Sorry, I just saw 35 Meeker or something, Meeker Court. Is there another thing going on in Meeker Court?
No, that's like I said, there are a few that are a little older, so we've left them up there. So it's always a question of the how long do you leave those things up? Yeah, there's nothing new on Meeker Court, so
Good.
you won't be getting any phone calls.
Thanks.
So just in terms of kind of like broader citywide projects, and I didn't bring a map, but I can pull up a map if need be, kind of working north to south and east to west through the city. Obviously up on, some big projects. I mentioned the iPark project up on Main Avenue. The big project in that area that's kind of been ongoing and floating around for a little while is BLT's project on the west side of Glover. You're aware of the curb project that's under construction. Those are those kind of orange and gray buildings that are residential towers on the east side of Glover Avenue that are, built just north of where the new train station is going in. So BLT has got a proposal in to redevelop the west side of that with a large development, which is about 1,000 units. It's a big project with several large towers. And obviously the big concern up there is traffic. So that, we're kind of trying to work through that issue with them and see where things stand. They're doing the units as part of a master plan they're proposing. So that's being peer reviewed by 2 consultants on the city side at this stage. I don't really have a time frame on when and when this will get to the actual public hearing / vote stage. I think that it may end up being like another joint public hearing proposal with both the Planning Commission and the Zoning Commission, because as part of their proposal, there's several text changes they're seeking and other items. So what we're thinking may potentially be a solution would be tying the approval to infrastructure improvements that obviously have to happen on the road networks up there, because anybody who's ever driven up there pre-COVID, post-COVID knows at certain times of the day that's kind of a parking lot. So there's a lot of work that needs to get done before certain things could move forward in that area. Moving further south, just no real update on POCO or Wall Street Place. I mean, obviously the application was approved by the Zoning Commission, but right after it was approved, the item was appealed, and so it sits in the courts. I don't have a time frame or an update. Typical land use appeals had been taking about 18 to 24 months, but I don't know what the schedule is with the courts when they were shut down for a long time because of COVID. So I don't know if there's a backup or if there's any way this gets expedited, but that's just kind of where that stands. And I think you saw on the news that there's the potential that there could be a performing arts college taking some footprint in the Wall Street area. And if that happens, obviously that'll be a home run for the city and just has the potential to really transform that area just by the vitality that could bring and then the people that will bring and improvements to some of the properties that could be involved. So that's a real win-win if that happens for the city.
Any new applications come in for the Norton property?
No, I was going to get there, but funny, we had conversations with the prior applicant who looked like they were going to come back in with a project that from a city P&Z staff point could have been a real winner in terms of job generation, much lower traffic generation. But they just all of a sudden kind of went radio silent. I emailed their attorney a couple of weeks ago and she said, they haven't heard anything. So I'll check in with them periodically, but right now, nothing pending. There has been some interest in that property, so we get some feelers every once in a while, but there's nothing imminent on that site.
Loman's Plaza on West Ave.
That was my next one. Yeah. So
All right.
Toll Brothers did get approval. That's called the Pinnacle Project. That's the southernmost piece of the Waypoint project. So that did get approval from the Zoning Commission. Actually, that got approved 3 different projects over the last 5 years, but that one, Toll Brothers is planning on moving forward over. I did talk to their attorney a couple of weeks ago, and he says they're working on their building plans right now, and they anticipate filing either the end of this year or the beginning of 2022. So we're hopeful that breaks ground and gets under construction by the spring at the latest. That would be really good. And once in a while, we do get inquiries about other properties just north of Waypoint. There's a few other parcels that are kind of, I think at some point will get developed, but there's nothing imminent. Obviously, the YMCA site was another property that was the hospital had plans on. When we had met with them several years ago, they were talking about the project you just saw in the papers last week about the tower site at the hospital, with the idea being that they would move patients from double bedrooms into single bedrooms and then relocate all of their hospitals, like doctor offices, out of that building, then move them down onto West Avenue. That was the plan then. I don't know what they're thinking now. They have pulled demo permits for a lot of those buildings down on West Avenue. So maybe this is a precursor of a new project to come down there, which has the potential to be a great anchor for that piece, especially if the Toll Brothers Pinnacle project comes in. So fingers crossed we see something in that area in 2022.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
On the hospital, well, the YMCA property in the hospital, I mean, we had a lot of discussions and even negotiation about use of the parking lot for events at Matthews Park and all. And that was all tied to that project. And I'm curious if you know this, if they pull the permits to demo the property, do you know what that entails? I guess we don't know anything yet, or?
No, we don't know anything beyond they pulled the demo permits. They haven't, we haven't had discussions with them recently about the YMCA site. So if there's parking arrangements that are made, hopefully that would still be honored through that process, so long as, it didn't infringe on whatever they had to do on the site to make it.
So they
secure.
pulled permits on that particular piece of property with a YMCA?
I can double check, but I know they had several of the properties that were part of that package that they pulled the demo permits for, but I believe so, but I can confirm.
Yeah, could you? Because the Historical Commission had an interest in that as well, because they were.
Yeah, and I know they did, when they first purchased the property, they worked with the Historical Commission to come in and document the buildings.
Right.
And I think they allowed them to pull out the items within the building that had this historical significance that they wanted to.
Yeah, they were going to incorporate some of those into the new building. So yeah, if you can let me know, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, we can follow up for certain. And obviously South Norwalk's got a lot going on. I mentioned that the 10 Monroe Street project, and if you hadn't seen that, I think I can pull that images up if you needed to, but that was approved last week by the Zoning Commission. That's about 150 units, really right next to the train station, directly adjacent to the One Chestnut property that's out of the ground, and should be, getting close to the CO stage, later this year. And I think they're doing really well on looking at commercial tenants for that site. So that's really going to start to kind of shape that neighborhood right by the train station. So that's really an exciting project. Last week, there was the the grand opening for 121, 123 Water Street, which I think is Harborside Sono, I think it's what it's called. Really nice building, great views from the top. I think they're already over 80% leased, and they just recently got open. And there's not a lot of commercial space there, but that's also fully leased out. Soundview Landing, the old Washington Village property, they're moving quite along really rapidly on the third phase of construction. Leasing obviously is going great, and on the first 2 stages through that And we're also seeing a lot of interest for smaller kind of uses and spaces kind of further south in South Norwalk for like whether they're light manufacturing, kind of like little R&D things and little warehousing spaces. And I'm sure Sabrina can provide more background, but that little area just south of there, which kind of dovetails nicely into what we're going to propose as part of the industrial zone studies, because a lot of that land immediately is south of these developments is industrial zone. So we think this could kind of work nicely and flow well through that area.
Spinnaker's project in East Norwalk, is that completed? They have their CO?
The last building is not CO'd yet, but in speaking with them, that was my next area. So you're leading me very well. Thank you. The commercial space is probably close to 100% leased. And that one had about 60,000 square feet of commercial. So it was really a really good TOD project right at the train station. And the residential is already 80% leased plus. So that's another.
What kind of companies have leased the commercial space?
I don't know the specifics. I know that, there were obviously one of the large ones on the ground floor was a restaurant. There were various commercial office spaces in there that were looking at that. I know they were looking at a brewery one time, but I think that may have gone elsewhere. So there's just a mix of commercial. And I think they were looking at, there was one small area that probably is best suited for retail, in and out quick retail, that I don't know if that one was leased up, but they were really optimistic, and they weren't really worried about the last space because they were just seeing so much interest on the site. So they were really, pleased with the way that project turned out.
So you said that the one building is not complete.
Yeah, the newer building, the one they didn't retrofit, I don't think all the residential units are completely fitted out yet in there, but they're moving along at a good clip.
When do they project being completed with the project?
I believe supposed to this calendar year. I can firm that up with them, shoot them an email and ask that.
But things are moving according to plan, or at least according to their plan?
Yeah, I think they're really happy with the way it's progressing.
Okay.
And then we're also seeing a lot of interest with things on the Route 1 corridor. And, I think as part of the zoning regs rewrite, and also I know TMP is also has a grant application in to do a kind of a corridor study. We're seeing a lot of different things from not only a transportation standpoint, but we'd like to kind of reshape that area so you don't drive down Route 1 and see a lot of ugly signs, a lot of bad architecture, and a lot of big parking lots. We'd like to see them, when they redevelop into something that's, because obviously, if you go to the Westport line or you go to the Darien line, the feel of those two areas is completely different. And I think we can regulate this area to look a lot more attractive. We are still seeing a lot of interest in these areas. I've had meetings within the last few months with 3 different large grocers who I think will be coming into this. One of them's here, but then maybe retrofitting their building, and then 2 new large grocers that'll be coming into the area. So that's, there's an increased demand for the Route 1 corridor. And we're also seeing, a couple of the projects I talked about at the beginning, there's still demand for certain residential. And we're also seeing a lot of demand for self-storage, which is probably my least favorite land use of all land uses. So we're going to look at that and try to get a better handle on where that should go. So it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. So it's not taking up too much valuable reset.
Well, as the Westport Avenue self-storage complex, as I'll call it, is now that it's near completion, it's pretty shocking to see the size of it. I guess that's kind of always the case. You don't really know what you're going to get until you actually see it up.
Yeah, and that's also, that was as of right in terms of the size. So it's not like they got special dispensation to get a bigger building there. Just to give you some highlights of some other things, a few of these we touched on. You may have seen that Manresa Island, there was a letter of interest that NRG put out for developers to look at the site. So that's kind of floating around. So maybe there's some good news on that going forward. I mentioned the zoning regulations rewrite. There is a public meeting. We're going to send our flyer out next week at the end of July. So there'll be the first public meeting, and then the big kind of public event will be kind of mid-September of 2021. To go along with the industrial zone study, the The waterfront study will also probably kick off in late July or August. Once we get the public draft out for the industrial zones, we'll kind of get them going on the waterfront study. And last one on my list was, we are required by the state of Connecticut to do a affordable housing study. So my staff is kind of doing a lot of that in-house. We might seek some consultant help in 2022 to finish that up and work on a little bit of the outreach, but that's another project that we're working on. So there's a lot going on. Just to give you an update, a couple of weeks ago, it slowed down a little bit, but there was a 5-week period where we got 185 new zoning permits in the department. So it's just big demand for, and then, these run the gamut from generators to decks to, commercial project, commercial fit out. So there's just a lot going on. And hopefully that was kind of gives you a good overview.
Yeah, Steve, I just want to circle back real quick to Manresa Island. I mean, I think this has been on everyone's radar for, precedes me and many of us here. So you said they sent out something to you or to your department or someone within the city looking to entertain the idea of a developer purchasing the property. Is that correct?
So they looped the city in, but they sent that out through other channels in order to get solicitations from potential developers that are looking at the property.
John, I could talk about that a little bit because I was on some calls. It's kind of a strange approach they're taking. They put together a website, and we had a call with them, and we asked, "Are you going to put a press release out on this?" And they said no. So it's kind of a stealth marketing campaign. I don't know how serious to take it. I don't know if Jess wants to weigh in. It's hard to know how active they are being with this. We kind of forced them to meet with the neighbors to talk about it. They're not really forthcoming on it.
Well, I'm assuming the remediation is the first topic of any conversation when you're talking about Manresa, correct?
Yeah, and they say they appear to have engaged a company that they say has experience dealing with sites like this that need extensive remediation, and so they're also saying their marketing would be to developers who are able to work with these conditions. But as I said, it's kind of a strange marketing campaign that they don't want to put a press release out, although they do have the website.
So are they going to absorb the cost of the remediation? Or is that what
it's all part of whatever they end up doing with the property, who pays for it. That's it's privately owned, so they'd have to work that out.
Right.
The cost of the remediation depends on what's built there. I mean, residential requires greater remediation than commercial.
I think what's interesting too is that they've had other sites in the US that they've done this exercise with. So they seem to have an idea of not a specific developer, but the developer's skill set that they're looking for. And they've assured us that they've gone through processes like this before. It's just a really interesting approach in the way in which they're moving forward. And of course, we have gotten a few calls from developers to talk to the city about what to expect and what the zoning is and so on and so forth. And we've been continuously pointing them back to the study that was done with the Manresa Neighborhood Association in the city of Norwalk a couple of years ago that point out several land uses. One residential, one is a marina, another is a school, some sort of marine school. And then there's also the solar use as well. So we continuously point them back to that, talk about some of the constraints that are on the site. And again, to your point, Chairman Keyes, it's sort of, you would think that remediation is really the top of the list. I think we met with District 6 EPA office out of Boston a number of months ago to talk to them about remediation and brownfield money. And that site is only eligible for federal brownfield money if it is publicly owned, not privately owned. And that's true for any of those programs. So obviously, the city's not in a position to be able to take on that particular property. And I believe Energy wants to sell it to a developer, but interesting to know the caveats of that.
Yeah, and there's another aspect of this, which is ConnDOT is planning on using part of that property for staging for the walk bridge, which is going to tie up at least a portion of that property for 5 years, whatever it may be. So that's kind of a factor that has to be considered in all this marketing.
Regardless of what happens, it's going to be a long-term redevelopment.
So, yeah, I won't bring my check to the bank quite yet. Okay.
John, I have a question for Steve. if
Yes,
I may.
Mr. Keegan, please.
Steve, you mentioned waterfront zones. Where specifically are you talking about? Is it more than one? Is it the river? What, can you just give me a little indication?
Sure. In a nutshell, it's kind of the Norwalk Harbor area, the river, like basically if you go from Wall Street down to Water Street, that's kind of the crux of the area we'll be looking at.
So even where the boat yards are and where
Right.
like the yacht clubs, that would be included as well.
Correct. Yeah, and we had some, so as part of the industrial zone study, the consultant team had a bunch of different stakeholder interviews, and they did talk to a couple different marine owners as part of that. And then just point out the waterfront study itself, we're going to bring in a couple people from harbor management to sit in on the committee with us. So we have, their knowledge and their input as we go forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So Steve, you want to pass the baton to someone else?
Yeah, I'll be quiet unless you have questions for me.
Any questions for Steve before we move on? No? All right. Thank you, Steve. Very informative. Mr. Badoli, Jess, I know, I believe you had some input into some updates that you would like the committee to hear about.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it, Jess. You're good.
So I have two updates that I can add to what Steve has said. So a couple weeks back, we were able to secure $3 million through the state bond bill, and Senator Duff was able to do that. It relates to the MLK Corridor Initiative. So for the last couple of years, we've been meeting with that corridor initiative, and I believe that we updated you that the $3 million, we recently met with subcommittees to be able to talk about some of the different topic areas that we want to focus on moving forward. We're making really good progress there. So we'll be meeting as a larger group in the next couple of weeks, and we have another subcommittee meeting to go through, but looking really great as far as that goes. A second update is that we have identified locations for banners in the urban core, and we put the banners up in Whistleville already. They're banners that designate the neighborhoods. What we're trying to do is add some color to the street, add some vitality to the street. We also, you'll see next week, are putting out brand new garbage cans and recycling receptacles in Wall Street West Ave area, as well as Washington, and then moving the existing garbage cans over to the Ely Ave Molvoy area. That's another update. And then I will leave it at that. I did have one more, but I lost it when I talked about the garbage cans and the banners. We're just really excited about it. So let me update you after Brian goes.
Just real quick, Jess, would this committee be involved in the allocation of the MLK money?
That's correct. Yep. So so basically what we've done is we've gone through specific priorities for each of the subcommittees, and of course it equals more than $3 million, the amount of work that folks would like to see. There's public art, there's solar lighting and cameras. One is tree planting, park and playground improvements, transportation, mobility and parking. There's a housing subcommittee. So it really crosses all the gamut. Public Wi-Fi and education hub is another. So it's going to equal more than 3 million, but I think what we tried to do was not limit ourselves with a $3 million cap, really identify all the priorities that we think should be looked at for the actual neighborhood, and then figure out whether it be CDBG or HUD money or the city capital and operating budget or the $3 million, how we can get those things done.
You mentioned a subcommittee has been put together to work on this?
Yep. So there are several subcommittees. So each of those topics that I just mentioned has a separate subcommittee. And they've identified the priorities. I think the tough part is that we only have $3 million and that all of the priorities equal more than 3 million. So we're going to have to double back and identify which ones we want to push forward. And there's different criteria for each of the pots of money, right? So the Urban Act program is the money that came through from the state, the 3 million. And then of course there's the CDBG HUD money, but there's different caveats for all those monies. So we're kind of trying to figure out what the priority is and what the best place is for it to land.
I'm assuming the District B council representatives are involved in this process.
Yep, that's correct.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Jess. Brian. Mr.
Yeah,
Badoli.
thank you. How you doing?
Good, sir.
All right. So yeah, it's more of an update, sort of adding on to some of the items Steve mentioned around the South Norwalk train station. As you know, we're leading the South Norwalk TOD study. As a result, some of the initial feedback that we received, we're taking a deeper dive into some of the concerns and also some of the topic areas that are coming up in the plan right now. And as Steve mentioned, it's a bit of a dynamic process because you have the private development community putting forth projects while we're kind of trying to plan. So we're really working, closely to try to integrate the planning work that we're doing along with the development and some of the community response that we've heard. One of the things that we'll be focusing on over the next month here is to develop a community advisory committee, really reaching out to local area residents, trying to make sure that they're adequately involved in the sort of programming design in terms of what we're going to be putting forth as initial recommendations at a public meeting in September. We're concurrently obviously looking at other parcels throughout the area, trying to figure out what's prime for development and what's prime for preservation. Really trying to, what I kind of refer to as, to do an exercise in neighborhood balancing, trying to accommodate the needs of, the diverse needs of the entire area that, lives around the train station, but also uses it as well. So that's taking up, a good majority of our development focus. Concurrent to that, we are still looking at Webster Lot. If you'll recall, in 2016, a report was issued that identified a number of constraints. So what we're trying to do is basically navigate some of those constraints on the front end through some additional planning and financial modeling, so that if a question does go out and is asked to market, that we sort of have an idea what the response will be, so we could have a more informative discussion between the parties. So it's more
How's that going, Brian?
there.
I know that's been in progress for quite some time now. Is there hope to be had there that we can finally move forward with getting that out to developers and get a plan together?
Yeah, I think, we made headway definitely on some of the larger constraints, including some of the parking, understanding what the parking requirements are going to be long-term over there based on some of the historical documents that govern the use of the site. We've done more research in terms of some of the easement concerns. I think what I'm most focused on right now is taking a look at the potential financials for a development there, how that could work given the need to replace and expand some of the parking. And also how the market would respond or absorb that scale, or if there were additional units proposed there, what that would look like given all the ongoing development that you're seeing, obviously at Harborside Sono, around the train station, and then also in the Pinnacle area. So we're trying to kind of just take a look at the market a little bit more, but there is obviously hope. It's just, I think it's going to be a matter of when and what the timing is that the market can handle and absorb that.
Okay, that's good news. Anything else?
Well, that's it, unless there's any questions on anything specifically.
Committee.
What I might want to inform you all about too is the rehab program that Jess is talking about. In terms of CDBG, we have 6 ongoing projects right now, and we're going to be moving into another phase of another 7, trying to do some facade improvements throughout South Norwalk, and then hopefully expand that even further with the MLK money that's derived from the committees that Jess was just speaking about.
Okay.
Brian's also leading work at 50 Washington Plaza, the installation of tables and chairs that will be installed on a newly laid ground surface. So that should be up in the next couple of weeks. You'll see that soon.
Yeah, it's coming along very well. I drive by it every day.
And then just last but not least, not to announce an announcement, but we're really excited about it. We're working with Building and Code Enforcement and Municity, which is our software that helps us permit and license to be able to do online permitting for mechanical, plumbing, and electrical by September the 1st. So instead of having folks come into City Hall, they'd be able to go onto a website, they'd be able to fill out the form on the website, upload the documentation that they need to, and actually have the permit approved by email and take payment over that website as well. So really big strides there, and it's something we've been working really hard to get to, and just really happy to see Building and Code making so much progress there.
Good stuff, Jess. All right, any questions for our planning directors here on this phone call today? No? Okay. Well, yeah, thank you, Brian, Jess, Steve. You've given us a great update and very informative, and we should do this more often. Okay. Well, I see.
So John, I just want to say, I'm sorry. Jessica and Brian and Steve have really been responsive to the concerns that folks in District B have with some of the development going on. And I think it's been a good thing. I think it's encouraging, and I appreciate all the time and effort they've put in and to listen to what folks have been saying and trying to make those changes where they can. So it is appreciated and noticed. So it's a lot of work to be done, and I appreciate their efforts at listening.
Thank you,
And
Darlene.
taking back what they hear and try to incorporate those changes and working with the community. So,
which is very important. Yeah, thank you for saying that, Darlene. I'm sure they're very happy to hear that as well. Seeing no other hands. Mr. Keegan, enjoy your trip.
If we
Don't
come
forget
back,
your
can we,
SPF.
I will.
if we meet again, can we meet where Tom is? Is that possible?
Yeah. Can we'll work remotely from where Tom is.
And we don't want to meet where I was one of the last times at Yale New Haven, right?
No.
We're going to have a contest at the end of the year. The craziest place Tom Keegan zoomed in from.
Nothing keeps you down,
you
Tom.
don't have to go to Yale just to get where you're going either, right?
That's right. That's it, Darlene. You're right.
Okay.
And
Enjoy
Tom,
the wedding.
congratulations to your son.
Yeah, enjoy the wedding.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, motion to adjourn. Mr. Livingston, all in favor? All right.